thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight to hear us. We do have a very distinguished panel, and I'm privileged to be with Jennifer and Max to talk about this subject of the two elections. Paul's not quite right. Mary and I left London on the day of the 2024 election, and to be perfectly honest, was glad to get out of the place. So I don't have I'm about to present a highly personal view of what I think happened, and you can see some of it from the title of the speech, which I've called it The Purge of the Left and the Candidate from Central Casting. And the purge of the populist left. And it's actually important, I think, to remember that there was a populist left in Britain within the last 10 years. And I experienced it at first hand because Mary and I were in Camden. We were house sitting for a friend, and Corbyn had just been nominated at the last minute for the leadership contest after Ed Miliband resigned after losing the 2015 election, and I saw there was a meeting to be held in the Camden Town Hall. Said to Mary, let's go along, and I expected to see 50 people in the back room with the bearded old bloke, and we were in the queue around the Camden Town Hall for over an hour, and talking to all sorts of people from all sorts of places. I remember one particular woman who was an organizer for the public sector union, desperate for change. So I've been a community organizer, a political organizer, and a union organizer, and I thought, when I see a phenomenon like that, I think, oh goodness, something's going on here. And at that meeting, we couldn't get into the main hall, it was full. We were in the council chamber, it was full, and Corbyn spoke to 3,000 people from the top of a fire engine outside the Camden Town Hall. So all up, probably 10 to 15,000 people attended that meeting where I expected there to be 50. So there was a populist left, a strong one. And this was the manifesto that was produced by it's in the, if you look it up, it's edited by the Secretary of the Labour Party, who definitely wasn't a Corbyn fan and who definitely wouldn't have been responsible for much of this. But it was called for the many, not the few. And if there's one capsule that sums up what Labour should be about, in my opinion, it's that. And I've listed up there some of the things that it included. And I think particularly into tuition fees. I mean, we did something in 2005, that actually was crucial to us winning that election. But that was a magnificent document in my view. So it wasn't just a populist, it wasn't just a lot of people, it was also a lot of people with a program, which was genuinely left. And then, of course, people said, well, it was all very well and good, but he can't win an election. But then look what happened in 2017. There were two quite remarkable turnaround elections. And on the left-hand side, there's what happened in I think I've got it. Have I got it round the right way? Yes, I do, yeah. On the left-hand side, New Zealand. So Andrew Little retired, Jacinda came in, whoop, up we went. In Britain, they got Theresa May called an election, and the people went to the polls, and whoop, up they went. And you can see the Labour rose remarkably in both places. The minor parties nosedived, and the Conservative parties in both cases kind of fell down. So there was support, considerable support, and the only difference, people forget, we didn't win the 2017 election in New Zealand. We came second, and we were installed in government by Winston Peters for reasons that he will have kept to himself, no doubt, but you could see pretty much what they were. Gave him a good job. So I think, that it left populism with a program and with considerable electoral support. So what happened? The candidate from central casting appeared, and I'm an old, been observing politics at close hand from a long time. If ever I saw an interest, this was one. Being the Director of Public Prosecutions, knighted, Sir Keir Starmer, suddenly pops up in Holborn when the former MP had resigned, and the word was, was a bit too early for him to make his run, but he was very clearly designed for higher things. And it wasn't just him. I mean, there were all kinds of other indications about this left project could not be allowed to continue. They weren't the adults in the room, as some of my more conservative Labour friends used to often talk about. So there was Starmer, safe pair of hands, all of that sort of thing. In my opinion, what we got was like I said, the candidate from central casting. The Five Eyes agencies no longer had to try and influence us by the media, through the media. They had their man in the job, and that's pretty much what I think happened. And it's my opinion. And there's a bit of evidence. Starmer joined the Trilateral Commission, and that was set up by Nelson Rockefeller after the Shah of Iran was deposed. Very, plotters galore, very influential ones, very influential in the United States around that time. Former Director Mike Pompeo, the man who said, heck, I was in the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stole, and was the Secretary of State, said, we will do our level best to stop Corbyn being elected. And that was at to a meeting of Jewish organisations in London. So, the plotters. There are a couple that are quite interesting. Morgan McSweeney is now, I think, ensconced in number 10, or Parliament, not quite sure. Luke Akehurst is in Parliament, and I'll have a bit more to say about him later. But they are both strongly, they've been working on this for years, literally. It's interesting, Brian Nunwick sent me a Guardian article about Morgan McSweeney the other day, and it came to me via Google with a great big red banner. Be careful about this, emails like this have been used to capture your information, basically warning me off. And when I tried to go to the URL, it said, 404 page not found. And this was 2 days after it had been published in The Guardian. So I'm a bit suspicious about these sorts of things, but they obviously didn't want that article to get too much publicity. Luke Akehurst is an altogether... I watched Labour List for years and years as they steadily moved in to the National Executive Committee in the Labour Party and gradually took it over, and we'll see what they did then a bit later on. And the main tactic was weaponised anti-Semitism. And I experienced this at first hand too, from a very good friend who'd been very good to us, who took us out to lunch one day, Mary and I, and assailed us on the fact that Jeremy Corbyn was a terrible anti-Semite. And I disagreed. I could see absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. And to cut a long story short, I still have a great deal of time for it, but we are no longer friends. And there's a lot of evidence about what went on. Al Jazeera did brilliant work uncovering, some of the shenanigans that went on with the Israeli embassy and elsewhere. Corbyn, I think, made some mistakes. He didn't fight when they put up to the National Executive Committee that anti-Zionism was also anti-Semitism. where I think he could have, and so that went through, and that was used later on to get rid of him as well, from the not only from the Labour whip. So, 2019 Brexit election. Starmer was in charge of Brexit policy. I saw him at several conferences in the time when we were there. He pushed for the second referendum, which was a fatal mistake, because it was never going to, having had a referendum and had to go through it, people weren't about to entertain the idea of doing it again. So Starmer was elected a Labour on the Corbyn platform of the Labour Party, and then basically has resigned from pretty much everything he promised then. And this is the 2024 campaign, and I mean, when you go into a campaign with the slogan "change," what on earth does that mean? And that is as small target as I've ever seen. I've seen lots of change for the better slogans, but never one that just said that. And the image on the right is actually the cover of the Labour Party manifesto. So if you look back to "For the Many, Not the Few" and contrast it with the 2024 campaign manifesto, which was change, with a bloke in a white shirt and a pink tie maybe, it's all about me. It's not about the policy, it's not about the platform, it's all about me. And so, yes, the part of the thing I talked before about Morgan McSweeney and Labour List is there's been a lot of movement into the party structure and organisation. So it's pretty well now altogether controlled by Starmer allies. And they've been working for years to sort of white-hand him and get rid of him. In this election campaign, I've put up, that's Luke Akehurst again, parachuted into North Durham. He lives near London, so they put him into North Durham as a safe Labour seat. He was an NEC councillor. Faiza Shaheen, I went to her campaign launch in 2000 and, what are we talking about, 2019. Brilliant woman, lectures in inequality at LSE, and she was the candidate in 2019, one of the few who increased Labour's vote. About 10 days before the election, the close of nominations in 2024, she was defenestrated by a 3-person committee from the Labour NEC on the basis of tweets that went back 10 years or so. Just absolutely appalling behaviour, in my opinion. I had the pleasure of telling the local Walthamstow MP what I thought of it when I met her on the street when she was out canvassing, but that sort of got it off my chest a bit. And she wasn't the only one. A lot of them, all the left candidates were purged, pretty much. The only one they couldn't get rid of was Diane Abbott, and they did try to do that. So what happened? With that kind of anodyne policy mix and that kind of dissatisfaction from the left, the turnout, as you would expect, went right down. And just put the figures up on the other side there of the relative turnout in the two Corbyn elections and the Starmer election. You can see the Labour vote steadily dropping. So what we've ended up with, if it goes next, is a huge majority in the Parliament and a relatively small percentage of a low turnout in the population. So it's not a strong base for whatever may happen in the future. What hasn't changed? Use the bomb. He made a point of this because it was a direct point to attack Jeremy Corbyn. I will press the trigger. Grifter's got a grift. Tony Blair is back in spades, and the big target will be the NEC, and the big target there will be the database of medical records that Larry Ellison would like to get his hands on. Austerity government, the winter energy payment is, they've got $3 billion to spend in Ukraine, but not for pensioners. Welfare benefits down, the National Health Service will be gradually privatised, and Starmer's message was things are going to get worse, made a great speech about it. No change, war in Ukraine. And this is the last thing I want, or pretty much, not quite. This is Starmer going to visit Biden. You know, meeting the camera. That picture at the top, I find extraordinary, because what that is Starmer arriving in Washington to see Biden, and you can see in the background a couple of generals or admirals or whatever, and you can also see the woman in the flowered dress is the British ambassador to the United States. But all that Starmer is interested in is walking to the camera on his own, on a red carpet with his little red dispatch box, which he sort of hugs to himself. So that says to me, this is a very insecure man. And of course, there he is meeting with Biden. But what they are meeting with, and we still don't know what they've decided, is whether or not the Americans will approve the British using their long-range missiles to attack into Russia. And Putin has been very clear. The only way you could do that is if it's programmed by Europe, by the British, in which case we will retaliate appropriately. So we're sitting on the edge of a time bomb as we speak, and it all is not yet to be revealed. Next plus last one. What I want to show here is the dip in the vote in the actual election, and Labour's votes flatlined ever since. And what's happened is the Reform, that sort of light blue, has risen. So you've now got two parties of the right outdoing the party of the, in my view, so-called left. And I think the lesson is that if left populism goes, what we get is right populism. And that is very much a possibility in the not too distant future in Britain, if I'm not mistaken. And the last thing, I just want this quote from Wolfgang Streeck I liked. Many of the solidarity resources, such as strong trade unions or mass political parties, have been fundamentally weakened during the neoliberal years. The mass political parties are losing members, shrinking to a core of advertising professionals. And again, in my opinion, if there's an important lesson for us, we're in New Zealand almost the last sort of, end of the social democratic experiment. And there's a message here for us, I think. Right, that's it from me. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go too long. So, Jennifer.
Can I borrow this?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And can I borrow this?
Oh, yes.
Do you want to sit over there so you can see my slides? Okay. Kia ora koutou. Ko Jennifer Curtin toko ingoa. I'm really pleased to be here, and I want to thank you for welcoming me. I am also not speaking in this role as an academic. I am speaking as somebody who just happened to be in the French countryside when Macron called the snap election. So we were hanging out with family, and this happened, and it was, I don't speak a lot of French, but we found it, as a political scientist, it felt like I was momentarily an anthropologist, and that was kind of cool. Sorry, Julie. So this is very much a personal perspective as well, and I I don't know that much. Maybe I'll just explain the photos and then move on to my thoughts about this. So we went to a New Front Populaire meeting, not unlike the Corbyn example we just heard about. It was a 38-degree day. It was at a hall that had very little, had no air conditioning, and there were no windows open, just one door. And we were sitting in the back, and I have to say their political rallies, well, they're not like Trump's, obviously, but they're very group-led. So there's a band playing in the left, really cool. This is a town that is known for its musical prowess. Then they've got two panels of people, and the panels have like 3 speakers on each side that come from different parts of the French community in that area. So they might be business, there was a feminist, there was a trade unionist, there's all sorts of people, and they talk first about the issues that matter to them, and then the deputy who's standing came in, and then the candidate from New Front Populaire came in, and then we had a video session with the leader from the New Front Populaire. So anyway, that was really cool. I didn't know a lot of what was being said, but I recorded the whole thing. And now I don't know what to do with that, actually. Apparently there's software that will transcribe it for me, but I don't know how to get it off my phone. So then, a couple of weeks later, we're sitting at home at the house in France that we were in. We went to the polling booth, which is up there on the left, but I didn't take any photos looking into it because I was a bit nervous I might get arrested. And then this is the contrasting situation. So we watched a couple of television stations, and the woman in the television set is from FE, and she was really, really passionate. You can see why I think that smaller parties that have come together in this left coalition, unlike the UK, the turnout was really one of the highest, still only like 67%, which is low for us, but high for France. So there was quite a significant mobilisation, and I think a lot of young people were standing as candidates for some of what I would just say, in case I don't get to it, that this notion that they are all the far left. Political scientists from Sciences Po and other reputable universities in France have said that actually if you put some of these far left policies on a page and then look at what Macron was doing all that time ago, actually it's not that far left. It's just a different left. It's just everything is relative when you're talking about left-right spectrum. So by the end of the night, this is after the first vote, at the end of June, we're drinking quite a lot of red wine and watching Le Pen thinking that they've won. So the context of this is I'm not an expert in French politics. I don't speak very much French. I read a little bit more than I speak. I spend a lot of time buying Libération, this fabulous newspaper, which tells us, I think, a little bit that the left is alive and well in France in a way that we might not see here. So I can be in a French countryside town that didn't vote RN, so it went for the sort of Macron centrist candidate in the end. But the fact that they are still selling Libération alongside Le Monde and the local little Châteauroux newspaper, and I'm still learning about the complex histories on both sides of politics in terms of the left-right and understanding that. The left is as diverse as the right, I would just say that. Macron in the campaign, which was short, obviously, but we went to I'm going to digress a little bit. We went to the Rugby World Cup opening match last year in France, and Macron spoke, and he was booed the entire time he was speaking from 90,000 people. These are the people that sing the Marseillaise all the way through a rugby match, right? So they're passionate nationalists, but they're booing their president. And it was the next night on television, there was a current affairs show, and they were saying it's rather ironic that the people who are at this rugby game are booing Macron because only the wealthy can afford the tickets. and if they're not happy, then, so I think he was very much during the campaign. Macron was maligned as a coalition-building centrist by quite a long time before he called this election, actually, even though he presented himself in that way. He was avoided quite a lot by centre-right candidates during the campaign. RN was very much a single-issue, anti-party, sort of anti-other party kind of positioning during the campaign, very simple messaging. And whereas the left was a multi-issue coalition, so there wasn't a single message in a way coming from the left. Of course, the electoral system that the French have for the National Assembly allowed for this amazing, I have to say, in 1 week, mobilisation of the left to counter the right, because everybody was depressed. Well, not everybody, obviously, like 33% of the population were not depressed, but there was an assumption that the right would win, and so there was a very active mobilisation in that 1 week between the two votes. I would just say, when I show you some data in a minute, the anti-immigration sentiment isn't new, we know this, and it doesn't exclude the police either. So, and in our wee town, the sort of people we hung out with, they would say things like, I don't like RN, but you could, and then they would go into something like, you can kind of understand where they're coming from. I'm like, no. But anyway, so it could be those shy RN voters that also happens, which we know about too. So what we know now is that with the new PM and so on, is that austerity politics rules, and it did under Macron. That pension reform is a really big deal there, like they want to raise the age and do some cuts on that. I also think we came to understand, because where we go, we take the train for 2.5 hours south of Paris and we go through farmland. And in all of these small towns, they have a lot of local, ecologically based agriculture, and they get really concerned about free trade deals with New Zealand, and so on. And you kind of get a sense of this regional politics of agri and then I'd say culture. And that's because there's a lot of culture that's connected to the way in which they produce their food. You can't easily separate those two things. And I think, I'm still learning about what that means for identity and politics. And that city-rural divide that we often see, even in Australian politics, when we think about what happened with Pauline Hanson all those years ago, that was very much a regional city, the outer suburbs and then into the countryside, when the economy is not looking after those in need. That's really what it is, and it's not just those in cities and rural communities as well. So these are some of the images from, though you can't see them very well, and those are the candidates that were in the first round up on the right there, outside of school. There's some slogan there, you can't see it very well, but it says, please don't give your vote to RN. So that's just on the school building. Nouvelle Front Populaire, I haven't heard feminism talked about in an election campaign for I don't know how long, right? Maybe 1970 something. But anyway, these sorts of isms were front and centre. They don't just talk about environment, they're talking ecology, and it's not the direct translation, it's not a transliteral thing. Importance of state services and unionism. So combining identity politics and class politics in a way that might have frustrated the left when they came to actually try and form a government or choose a prime minister, but certainly show that a coalition left can be supportive of each other and reinforce each other's messaging. Now, you're not going to be able to see this, unfortunately. I spent all afternoon putting this lovely piece of work together. This is my data. This is when I can't not be a political scientist, right? What I've tried to do here is I've taken the percentage of migrants in a district in France as at 2021. That's the first this is the name of the districts. This is the percentage of migrants in those districts. And then there's the elections 2024 final results. And I tried to colour code them. So the brown is mostly RN, and then the centre is Macron's mob, and then purple is NFP. So what I suppose it shows is up the top is Paris and the Parisian regions, so right out to, I shouldn't walk, should I? Right out to Versailles. Versailles is the only one that really has a mix of parties, like quite a few different ones. But anyway, and then you go to the north, and RN is really strong in the north, but, in Calais, and where we think all migrants are trying to get to the UK. Well, Mike would say why, right? But anyway, they're trying. So you can they only have I think it's 2.5% of the population in that district are migrant population. So I suppose the point of this crazy table is really where in the north and the east, there's virtually no RN in the west, that way. But Dordogne, where all the rich people go to hang out, there's quite strong support for RN there, but in the centre it's not really strong. But in the east and the south, all the way along that coast, except in Montpellier, Marseille and Avignon, where you see some NFP candidates. And down there is a higher percentage, but nowhere is there a higher percentage than in Paris and the outer regions, where you're talking 20 to 30%. And NFP are really strong there. So there is this sort of, I'll jump to my conclusion. Oh, there's my results. So immigration isn't high in all districts where RN wins. So my sort of pretend conclusion, my non-academic conclusion from that is there is other things going on, right? And we saw that in the German election. This is about, industrialisation in decline, that the jobs that these people used to hold, they can't hold anymore, and the lack of state investment in alternative jobs for workers means that there's a disillusionment that goes beyond, and they're looking for someone to blame. In the French case, though, I do think that there are issues of culture and national identity that permeate this reactionary sort of position. There's a particular idea of being French, and there's amongst some, that is very monocultural. I'm trying to be really polite here. And then, but there's also a lack of a recognition of the French role in colonisation and the implications of colonisation for what's now happening in terms of those who are born in France who are French and those who are born in France from somewhere else who are citizens but have come from somewhere else. And then there's this Germany, the industrial decline impacts create a constituency for populist nationalism. So what conclusions? It's disappointing to see that the left that had been kind of coherent in the campaign became incoherent once they really needed to work together and find a prime minister, more prime ministerial candidate. I don't think even if they had, that Macron would have chosen a left. It sounds like he's given an ultimatum to the new Prime Minister that he cannot appoint a left person to two of the top portfolios, Interior and Finance. And if that's the case, then the likelihood of him ever choosing Lucie was pretty slim. But there is a hung parliament. Macron's there till 2027. And there's this ongoing discontent. And Le Pen is, RN are busy, stirring the pot. The new PM saying it's likely to be austerity politics. So things aren't going to get any better. RN want a referendum. And another dissolution can be triggered in 10 months. So there may yet be another election on the horizon. Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Max Harris toko ingoa, he Pākehā ahau, Kei te ngenge ahau, ko tēnei te wiki o te reo Māori, kia kaha te reo Māori. Just wanted to say hi to everyone. My name is Max, and I said that I'm Pākehā, and I also said that I'm tired because I feel like there's a lot to fight at the moment against the government that is cutting public services viciously, that is savagely attacking disabled people, that is launching an onslaught against Māori, and that is doing this all in an interconnected way. And so it's actually quite nice to kind of take our heads out of that maybe and think about France and the UK. And I also think they want us to be tired and they want to wear us down. And I think that it's nourishing to be together and to build solidarity out of that. So I also, like Jennifer, was not going to speak in a very kind of academic way about the UK and France and speak quite impressionistically and from my experience. The first thing I wanted to say was I'm quite interested in the left in Parliament and outside Parliament and the lessons that can be drawn from the UK and France for both the parliamentary left and the extra-parliamentary left. I have very limited knowledge of France, and so I'll just say a couple of things briefly about France at the end, but it's really just from reading that you've probably all done. But I do have a bit more experience in the UK, where I lived and worked for 7 or 8 years. And actually hearing Mike speak about the Corbyn project made me want to say just one or two more things about my experiences with the Corbyn project. And I should say at the start, thanks to the Fabians for organising this, in particular Paul and Phil and others. And I also wanted to acknowledge both Jennifer and Mike. So Jennifer actually helped me first get more interested in electoral politics because I did an internship that Jennifer kindly accepted me for with Mike Rann in South Australia. And Mike Rann's a very different politician from Jeremy Corbyn. I can say more about that, but I'm forever grateful to Jennifer for that experience. And Mike, I had many interesting conversations with through my time living in the UK when Mike would come over and visit and talk about Corbyn and the UK. And I'm appreciative of that. And also, I think you've lit a bit of a spark in me in wanting to say just one or two more things than what I was going to say about working for the Corbyn project, because I worked for John McDonnell and the Shadow Chancellor, the Shadow Finance Minister, for 2 years while I was living in the UK. Maybe a fuller conversation about that is for another time, but maybe I just mention briefly how exciting a period it was when Corbyn came to power, as Mike was already pointing out. And so just to kind of leave you with a couple of pictures of that, I remember several things. One moment in the lead up to the 2017 election where I was in London and I walked into a bar that was becoming a club in London with some friends, and through the night on the dance floor, dozens of people started to sing "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn" to the tune of Seven Nation Army. And this was not in a particularly left-wing place. That was one image I remember. Another picture, another thing I really remember strongly was the day after the 2017 election, when everyone had said that the Corbyn-led Labour Party was going to lose, and they came very close to winning, and feeling a kind of spring in my step, and feeling actually in the months after that in conversations with people on the right or on the centre, that if you were on the left, you're actually on the front foot in conversations in a way that I'd never experienced at any time in my life. I mean, there was this feeling of momentum. I also remember, moments in town halls, similar to what Mike was talking about, moments door knocking with hundreds and sometimes thousands of people, and there was real political energy of a kind I haven't seen before. And then just to say a little bit about working for John McDonnell. So I was drawn to, this transformative left project, and also drawn to some serious people that wanted to flesh out that left populism in policy. And it was just also incredibly exciting to work inside the UK Parliament with some really incredible economists and political economists, working with Karis Roberts from IPPR on equalising taxation of capital and income, working with Guy Standing on universal basic income, working with Avinash Persaud on a financial transactions tax, talking about universal basic services, reclaiming universalism, talking about reversing austerity and being quite detailed and deliberate, and working every day to try to make that a reality, and also within a kind of internationalist perspective. You know, we hosted something called the International Social Forum, where Dilma Rousseff from Brazil came and spoke, and Tina Ngata from New Zealand came and spoke, and there was talk about UK reparations to the rest of the world. I could go on about this, as you can tell, but I just wanted to kind of convey some of that excitement. And maybe the final point I'll say about working there is there was a contrast between that excitement and then the reality of working in the UK Parliament, which looks glorious on the outside, and then on the inside, almost every night I would go out to the corridors at about 7 or 8 o'clock and see rats running down the end of the corridors. And one night I was working at my desk and a rat ran across the top of the books that were on this desk in front of me. And I think that was a symbol of this kind of British political order. Anyway, I could say a lot more about that, but I would love maybe at another time to talk with people if you're interested about what happened, how it didn't succeed, anti-Semitism, Brexit, and everything else, because I think there are important points to make about all of those things. But for now, I'll just try and be briefish. I've just got kind of 5 points I wanted to make about the UK election recently, drawing a little bit on that experience, and then 2 points about France, and I'll try and connect it up to Aotearoa New Zealand at the end. So Mike's talked a lot about the election result. I'll just say that I think what I sensed, and I've been back in the UK in June and also November last year, that there was key to that result was also this loss of patience of 14 years of Tory rule, and in particular the Liz Truss premiership being a source of ridicule, and Rishi Sunak being a prime minister to whom there wasn't significant love among the public. And it was an extremely poor Tory election campaign, is another important point. There's a picture of Rishi Sunak announcing the election while being rained on, a photo that then got reproduced and circulated among newspapers, and it was a kind of gaffe-filled campaign with some awful policy. It was certainly a disciplined but very boring and uninspiring Labour campaign. And as Mike pointed out, it was almost record low voter turnout, and in terms of aggregate total votes, lower votes than Corbyn received in 2019 and 2017. Another important point to make about the result was that 4 independents, to the surprise of some in the British media, won seats who drew attention to Israel's atrocities in Gaza, and Corbyn won his seat in Islington North as an independent, as well as 4 Greens winning their seats. And I went to go visit a friend when I was back in June in the lead up to the election, and they were at they had just come back from a Corbyn door knocking session, and this entire outdoor area in a pub, which was bigger than this hall, was kind of full of people who'd been door knocking for Corbyn. So there's still a lot of enthusiasm for Corbyn. Second important point I wanted to make was about the long tail of austerity. I'll just check the time to make sure I don't speak for too long. So I guess what I wanted to say here is that understanding the UK election, I think, isn't possible without thinking about what Andy Haldane, the economist, has called the lost decade of austerity, where there are various estimates about how many lives were lost, but a conservative estimate is that 120,000 excess deaths were caused by the vicious 14 years of sustained Tory cuts. And there are lots of images that I also have in my mind of those cuts, but I used to live in Bethnal Green in London, and I used to walk past every day this youth centre that was kind of permanently shut, where I also got mugged in that park. And these sorts of pictures, stay in my mind as kind of visible metaphors for austerity. I also think that that misery, and you can see it in the UK now, you can see it on the streets, you can see it in the looks on people's faces on the buses, but that misery means that there is deep public appetite for transformative change. And Mike put up the, Starmer talking about change, and I think that means that there's a very real risk of disappointment that might seem, not altogether unfamiliar to us here in thinking about Labour Party's promising transformative change and what follows from that. As Mike also said, I think it's right that there is a continuation of austerity under Labour. So the Chancellor is Rachel Reeves. This is a picture of Rachel Reeves. The new Labour government's talked about a $22 billion fiscal hole that they've found. This is textbook austerity politics. This is usually what you expect of Conservative governments, what we've heard from the national-led government, that finding these fiscal holes means we have to have cuts, and this has been used to justify what Mike also talked about, the cuts to the winter fuel allowance, the refusal to lift the two-child benefit cap, awful policy that has led to my old boss, John McDonnell, being suspended from the Labour Party, with 4 other Labour MPs who still remain suspended. So I think this is an important part of the context. We also, as Mike pointed out, have the return of Tony Blair and the second third way, or the third way again. The third way being sort of politics of Tony Blair and Bill Clinton that was characterised by several things, but I think in particular a willingness to use markets in delivering private services, an intense relaxation about private wealth, and often a very punitive approach to criminal justice. And we see all of these characteristics out already in Starmer's approach to government. Mike's very right to point out the influence of the Labour right and Labour Together and Labour First in particular, and the purging of the Labour left, which happened before the election and continues now. There are some tweaks to kind of Blairite third way politics, and I think we should analyse kind of each version of third way politics on its own terms. For example, I think in the UK and the US there is the kind of like return of the state, and I think this gives Starmerite politics a slightly different tinge. So he's talking about missions, drawing on the work of Mariana Mazzucato, the economist, the sort of 5 big industrial policy missions. That's a kind of more muscular role for the state than you would have seen under Blair, and it's a sign of the times. There's also a few more references to class, I think, possibly partly from Starmer's working class background and the working class background of the deputy leader, Angela Rayner, and partly an attempt, I think, to absorb the greater willingness to talk about class and left-wing politics and socialism among the British public. Starmer, as Mike also said, is a chameleon. So when he first became leader of the Labour Party, when he was standing to be leader, he committed to these pledges and committed to much of the Corbyn programme, which he has now gradually dropped over time. Could say more about that, but I'll just move through quickly. One other comment about the UK, which I think is important, is a really worrying thing, and Jennifer sort of talked about xenophobia in France, but I think a really worrying development under this Labour government in the UK has been sort of bipartisan moves towards xenophobic, anti-immigrant feeling. And so we all know the long history of colonisation from the UK and xenophobic populism, going back to Enoch Powell in the late 60s, talking about rivers of blood, and going back even further. But yeah, really alarmingly, in my view, Labour adopted the stop the boats language that we associate with the right, the hard right in Australia. So this is here, you can see it in small writing, the Labour Party website, which talks about Labour's border plan to stop the boats. And I think it's no coincidence and not unconnected that we all saw in late June and early August violent, poisonous, far-right-led riots in the UK directed towards immigrants. There are, I think, a few kind of rays of hope in the UK Labour Party, and in particular there's sort of a youngish squad made up of individuals like Belle Ribeiro Addy, Zara Sultana, Afsana Begum, the first ever British MP to wear the hijab. This is Zara Sultana, who responded to this by saying the real enemy of the working class travels by private jet, not migrant dinghy. Last point to make about the UK is, and this kind of connects to my time working there, is I think one enduring positive legacy of the Corbyn project is that the Corbyn Labour Party engaged in a dance with the extra-parliamentary left where it tried to build up the power of the left outside of Parliament while it was in government. And I think there are lessons to learn for New Zealand in that. So it used meetings, it used other resources it could to build up supportive movements and campaign groups while it was in power. Groups like We Own It, which I was a little bit involved with, a campaign against privatisation for public ownership, and some new progressive think tanks like Commonwealth and the New Economics Foundation, and there were other think tanks who were more traditional, like IPPR, who kind of moved left with the support and direction of some people in and around the Corbyn project. And what I was going to say is that if you look at the UK Labour policy manifesto, it's possibly to the left of New Zealand Labour at the moment, and I think that's partly because of the climate that was built up around those left movements. So there are several perhaps promising policy moves, so railways being returned to public ownership, which had not been kind of consistent policy pre-2015, a kind of Kiwi Bank for energy, which is Great British Energy, I think a policy that has been diluted and weakened, but remains a public intervention in energy markets, different from a more ambitious nationalisation plan under Corbyn, and instating VAT for private schools. I won't go on for too long, so just to make two quick remarks about France. So one was just building off what Jennifer said, that I do think the early developments in France earlier this year do show, this is an obvious point in some ways, but the potential and promise for left unity. So with the LFI, the Mélenchon-led party, uniting with the Socialists, the Greens, and the French Communist Party. And I think it should make us all think about the potential for progressive unity here. And it should make us think in a different context about why that's useful. And to me, it's practically useful here in a different electoral system, but for particular electoral wins, it's also useful in terms of presenting a government in waiting. It's useful in terms of allowing opportunities to work through more points of difference. And I would love to see, for example, this space being used, Friday night drinks for the left in Auckland, given the history of union activity on this street, as well as Pacific-led activism, and given Union and Labour Party and other activity in this building, but just to kind of float that idea. Last, more kind of sobering point I wanted to make is that I do think the appointment of Michel Barnier as Prime Minister could be a gift for the far right, that the kind of return to centrism could leave people feeling demoralised who are hoping for a progressive agenda. And if you think, it's just me, a kind of lefty saying that, well, Gordon Brown also recently just said something similar in The Guardian, where he said, sooner rather than later, the far right position will have to be countered with a progressive agenda. And he wrote something quite critical about moderates, claiming that kind of a return to centrism is the way to take on the far right. Lots of differences in context between Aotearoa New Zealand and France and the UK. I won't go through all of these, but clearly electoral system differences in foreign policy positioning, possibly greater class consciousness and histories of working class consciousness that I saw in London and throughout the UK, possibly greater industrial relations militant traditions in France. But on the positive side, what I would say in New Zealand is that we have a different Indigenous tradition here, which, as Bruce Jesson and others have said, I think provides really hopeful ways forward for the left more broadly. And I think the key challenge for the left in this country is for solidarity to be built between non-Māori and Māori. And I think, in the week where the government's introduced more detail about the Treaty Principles Bill, in the week that is Māori Language Week, Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, that's the challenge we should all be thinking about if we're committed to a stronger left. Tēnā tātou katoa.
Okay, thanks very much, Max. Paul's asked me to take the chair, ask people if they'd like to ask questions or make statements or whatever. Anyone want to go? Or have we stunned you all into absolute silence? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to comment on the most recent stuff with the UK around the sense of entitlement of Starmer around the gifts. Right? £100,000 of gifts and the sort of, while they report it, it becomes news at the same time as they're cutting the winter fuel allowance for pensioners, and the guy operates like an entitled shit. He just said, I deserve it. I'm not going to not take it. And he's got no political sense or appears, right? There's a sense of entitlement or a sense of
Yeah.
that just seems extraordinary to me.
He also picked the wrong team in Arsenal too. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Yes. Yes.
Robin Willie, I
Robin.
talked to my sister who is a retired pharmacist living in Britain, has lived in owned her own shop and lived in Britain for a long time. She's been a conservative voter, a liberal voter, but she's going to bed early because she's cold. She's literally putting on her electric blanket and sleeping in bed early. She's worried about going outside, going back into her town, Maidstone. I mean, it's a bulwark of conservatism there, because people are this angry, racist sort of people, and she's nervous. She's an old woman. So, the UK is not a happy place at the moment, and people who are traditionally conservative voters are unhappy with what's going on. She found Starmer a very grey man, and she's very grumpy with cutting her energy payment. And she's on a pension. Yeah. So that's my observation of the UK at the moment.
Okay. Thank you.
Could I
Others?
say something about that?
Oh yes, go on.
Yeah, just to say, can you hear me? My sister lives in London, and she recently went back to London after being here for a little bit, and she said she was looking around on the train, and she just felt like people looked bleak and unhappy. It was kind of similar. I think one thing about the UK is also there's been really rampant privatisation in energy and water. In some ways it's gone further than here, in other ways it hasn't. But yeah, I think it's hard living here to know how much anger there is about kind of rising energy costs, and as you say. And I was going to say one other thing. That's right. So I think one other thing to say about Starmer is that, and I don't mean to sound overly personal here, but as well as his politics being disappointing to me, I think he's quite psychologically uninteresting. At least in Obama, for someone on the centre left, not kind of left of centre, I think it's someone who was trying to be psychologically rich, but in the interviews that Starmer gives, he sort of wants to be having no feelings, and you can see he's positioning himself to a particular kind of establishment voter.
Ramsay MacDonald all of his day,
Thank you so much for the presentation. Really fascinating topic. I had a question about anti-immigrant. Anti-immigrant sentiment in New Zealand compared to Europe. It seems so much worse in Europe at the moment. Do you think New Zealand's turned a corner on anti-immigration sentiment, or is it just being swallowed up by so many other issues?
I think. Shall I just quickly? No. What we know from the New Zealand election study, and partly because of COVID-19 and the borders closing, is that immigration, as one of the top sort of 5 or 6 issues, did drop off the agenda, but there was no. It will be interesting to see what happens now that we're at net migration of 110,000 and where they go. And it's not, I don't know. It doesn't look to me like it's our anti-immigrant sentiments are any better than that we've closed, that we've gotten any better at what we and I think some of our Muslim and Palestinian students on campus, but also some of our Ukrainian and Russian students on campus are finding it really challenging being being different or being outed in certain kinds of ways and under threat.
What's the interference coming from?
Thanks for the question. I think. Sure. Yeah, I think there's, like Jennifer said, I think there's still, quite a lot of rampant xenophobia in New Zealand. I think it does make a difference that at the moment there isn't sort of bipartisan visible agreement to be anti-migrant. I was in Australia last week and I was talking to a Liberal voter who said it was great that the Labour Party had decided to take immigration off the table by also talking about being anti-immigrant. We haven't quite got that stage yet, although I would say, there was the Migrant Detention Act that did go through Parliament in recent years. So I think we have to be a bit vigilant.
Kind of connected to what a few people have said already. This is really a question, I'm going to try and not phrase it like a statement, but it seems to me that we're entering a phase here now with our present government that Britain faced about 7 years ago, which is we've got austerity being slammed on us, combined with a deliberate referendum being posed to us, which is going to divide our country and cause and that's what Britain had with Brexit, and that did damage that. I don't recognise, you probably tell from the accent, I don't recognise Britain now when I go back there. And I think it's the combination of that austerity and then getting people to not like each other. So it's not so much an immigrant thing, it's like getting New Zealanders not to like New Zealanders. And so what's your thoughts on that?
All of the immigration issues. Europe is basically being deindustrialized. The blowing up of the gas pipeline cut cheap gas away from Germany. So Germany is now exporting its industries to either China or back to the United States. And the same thing is happening in most of the European countries are going through a severe decompression, which means people are moving out, and also war in the Middle East is pushing people. So the migration issues there I think are quite different. And I suppose here we have also a big migrant influx for different reasons. It appears to me, not that I'm too knowledgeable about it. And I think the thing I'd like us to do, perhaps in the time we've got left, is not. If there was a lesson for me out of the UK election, it was, for God's sake, don't do what they're doing. Yeah. And we've now got Chris Hipkins, as I understand it, I think, if I read it rightly, is off to Britain this week to observe, and I hope he comes back with some of the good answers, because there are a few, particularly in how they operate some of their politics, and there are a lot about how they not to learn about how they operate their politics, and I think there's big questions for me in which bit of it we will go here. What I see in the Labour Party at the moment is a lot of energy coming up from the bottom. People aren't discouraged, and they want to be, have a say, and they do have some willingness to put effort into it. So the possibilities of a broader, more populist politics are not lost here. But we have to nurture the shoots very carefully, I think. Sorry, I just took that off in a slightly different direction, but I'm quite encouraged by what I see from the bottom. But there's some good things going on too. Phil Twyford, for example, has set up a WhatsApp chat group that's got over 100 people on it, looking at all the things that are going on in the world. And it's a very good discussion. And I haven't seen anything like that in the Labour Party for a long time. And so the more of that sort of thing that happens, in my view, the better. Sorry, then I'll stop.
Maybe just quickly, I agree that we should be worried about possible referendum on the Treaty Principles Bill, and even if the bill doesn't pass, there's talk of Hobson's pledge organising for a citizens-initiated referendum, and that's why it's really important we're all armed with knowledge about why that bill is so damaging. And so far, I don't think they have ACT and the government has succeeded in sort of saying they are on the side of the people, but we have to work really hard to skill up on that. I do think Brexit had a lot of is complicated. As someone that kind of opposed it, but I do think it was driven by some anti-immigrant sentiment, but also Brexit. The EU had been associated with some aspects of neoliberalism, and you had this, framing of take back control at a time when people felt powerless in the face of austerity. So I think it's slightly different, but I can see the parallels.
Is it time to say?
What does the patron saints say? Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Well, look. Yeah. Okay. Final message then. It's just what I said a bit before. I think the lesson is for me. We are still a social democracy that hasn't yet fallen into the big holes that I think they have fallen into in most of the European countries. We have the beginnings of we have the signs of a resurgence in the sort of politics that Max and I both saw and talked about and saw. And that to me is what this is all about really. We have the prospect of bringing back a decent government, and possibly in the not too distant future, but the energy and the push has to come from underneath, and thank God there are good signs that it's happening. So, with that, I hope more cheerful, no, sorry mate, what? All right, okay.
That's what we've got coming up in the near future. Rwanda, is Kagame the new Putin? A very interesting discussion by a Rwandan who is currently being tracked by the Kagame regime. He's very worried. Alternative economic narrative, well-being economics. Mike, Catherine Trebeck. Phil, is that you?
Well, it's the well-being RTO, actually.
Okay, and down kind of order, the great con.
Haven't you switched that out for PJ Prashad from the Tricontinental?
She's, yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay, yeah, so we've got stuff coming up. Just to mention your donations, of course, very important, yeah. Your donations go towards building up this kit. And we currently, I really like Max's idea of, we probably won't put it into a bar, but trying to make the trades hall a much more convivial place. We're going to be putting more money into lighting here and soundproofing, because it's got a huge boom to it. So camera, action, soundproofing, that's your donations are going towards. Thank you very much everyone for coming. It's been a very great event. Thanks to the speakers.